unilateral ceasefire now?
I call Kenny MacAskill.
Thank you, Sir Mark. It's 20 years since short and all was unleashed on Iraq. Millions died, and we live with the consequences today in terms of terrorism and the refugee crisis. It was a war perpetrated on lies and deceit, and it's why we must have openness and transparency in the conflict in Gaza today. The events that happened on the 7th of October have to be condemned. What Hamas did was shocking, unacceptable, and indeed every country has a right to defend itself. But the response from Israel has been disproportionate. It is now constituting a war crime, and it has to stop. It is for those reasons that we have to support a ceasefire, not a humanitarian pause. Those of us of the Christian faith will be celebrating the birth of a child in a manger in but a matter of a few weeks, and yet children in the sanctuary of a hospital in Gaza are unable to be kept alive because we do not have the ability to provide the care and welfare that should be a matter of right to them. That is something that should fundamentally shame our world, not just our government. A humanitarian pause is entirely inadequate. This is not some replication of some play like Oh, What a Lovely War, where soldiers stop for a Christmas truce, where they play football before it all starts again. This is the perpetration of a war upon civilians. Let's remember that we're talking about 2 million people in a very small area of this world. It's an urban, compact area. They were told to flee from the north by the Israeli Defence Force. They have fled south, and what has happened is that the bombing has followed them there, and they are dying there as they died in the north. So this idea that we can simply have some humanitarian pause is inadequate. We have to welcome the pause that took place. We have to appreciate that it did progress matters and see hostages returned, as rightly should be the case. But we have to call and demand a ceasefire. We all know, as I'll come on to, that Israel is sustained by the United States. If it wasn't for the United States, they would be unable to maintain their warfare. But we have to ensure that we deliver a ceasefire. The position of the UN Security Council wasn't shameful from their point of view. Let's remember, the UN Security Council supported a ceasefire. It was the United States that vetoed it. It was the actions of the United States and the supinity of the UK, who simply abstained, who didn't have the courage to go with the rest of the world. And let's remember, as with Iraq, the rest of the world is looking at the Western world and seeing nothing but hypocrisy. We speak out about the wrongs, rightly, that are happening in Ukraine, yet we've been far too silent in what has happened elsewhere in the world to people of different faith or different colour. So the failure of the UK to support a ceasefire at the United Nations Supreme Council was unacceptable, and indeed the actions of the United States were simply reprehensible. The fact of the matter is Israel is continuing to wage war against civilians. They may say that they're targeting Hamas, but it's quite clear that by all means.
And given the death and destruction in Gaza, we must look into the issue of arms sales to Israel. The UK's export control joint unit is clear that licenses will not be granted if, and I quote, there is a clear risk that the items might be used to commit or facilitate internal repression or a serious violation of international humanitarian law. Does my honourable friend agree that the government must thoroughly re-examine all licenses to ensure that we do not inadvertently end up facilitating a violation of international humanitarian law?
Well, absolutely. I do think that the arms trade is reprehensible, and equally we should be ceasing that. Not just what is happening in Gaza and indeed in Israel, but indeed what is being perpetrated in Yemen, where we continue to arm the Saudis in particular. But I think we also have to address not simply arms sales, but assistance we may be giving deliberately or indeed accidentally. The position is that RAF Artillery is being used by the US military. What are they using the US? What are the US military flying into Israel from RAF Artillery? Why do we not get told what it is that the Americans are taking from Cyprus, from a Royal Air Force base in Cyprus, into Israel? Is it machinery? Is it weapons? Is it military personnel? We have a right to be told. Why have 500 additional UK military personnel gone to Cyprus, where we already have several thousand troops? Why are they required there? What is their role? What nature are those military personnel? Are they special forces? Things are taking place and we're not getting clarity from the UK government. Exactly the same as if we had a cop-out at the United Nations Security Council, we are not getting clarity from this government as to our role. What are we doing to facilitate the United States and the armaments they provide to Israel? What are we doing in providing any actions that are being perpetrated by the Israelis when we should be speaking out? It is quite clear that what is being perpetrated by Israel is, first of all, to flatten the north of Gaza into smithereens where life cannot return. People aren't going to be able to go back and live there. They've destroyed the infrastructure. Now they're perpetrating it on the south of Gaza. And again, they destroy the infrastructure. They're making Gaza unlivable. The requirement will then be for people to seek to flee. And no doubt the US will be seeking to try and get Egypt to take them in as refugees. And the outcome of that will be that the Nakba all these generations ago will be replicated in Gaza. And if we don't take action and if we don't speak out, then we'll be as guilty now as we were then. The position has to be that we have to stop supporting the Americans, we have to stop supporting the Israelis, we have to demand a ceasefire, and we have to make sure that we are not complicit in any way. That means having the courage of our convictions and supporting a ceasefire at the United Nations, where the UK has a position as a regular member. We also have to ensure that we don't facilitate any other shameful matters, whether it's by allowing the Americans to do it or whether it's by direct through munitions that are created here in the United Kingdom.
I call Tahir Ali.